Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, whenever it is you're watching this Sunday service. I would just like to welcome everybody. And in other words, when I say welcome, another way of saying that is be here now. Some of us boomers and others will perhaps catch the reference to this book. Remember that came out many years ago in the early 70s, Be Here Now by the spiritual guide Ram Dass. But this message is clear and endearingly true. To be here now is to welcome the fullness of each moment, to be open to life and love. Indeed, many spiritual practices from many different religious traditions around the world, they're geared to help bring one's awareness into the present moment. So let's begin this worship service by bringing awareness to this day, to this moment. Welcome to this moment, this precious life. Be here now.
Our opening hymn this morning is Do You Hear? It's number 112 in the Gray Hymnal.
A Place We Are Creating by John Scher. The future is not some place we are going, but one we are creating. The paths are not to be found, but made. And the activity of making them changes both the maker and the destination. May we be open to the possibilities of this creation. Please join me in saying our affirmation. Love is our doctrine. Compassion is our way. Here we seek to create a joyful home for free religious exploration. Build a community of caring fellowship. Nurture the hopes and serve the needs of our world. Thresholds by Reverend L.A. McCrae. We light this chalice on the shorelines of life, gathered as one at thresholds unknown, surrendering to the mystery and blessing that surely awaits. As we dispel fear and call forth love, light, and peace, crossing over the threshold together as one. Here at UUCS, we light 3 chalices. The first to symbolize our congregation, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Salem. The second chalice we light to represent our Unitarian partner church in Šimenvalva, Transylvania, Romania. And the third we light for the children and youth in religious exploration and the world at large.
Let's center ourselves for just a moment, being aware of this moment, being aware of how we're feeling, in touch with the subtler rhythms of life. And I'd like for you to consider being compassionate for yourself. We don't often think of ourselves as worthy objects of compassion. We forget ourselves. So when we practice compassion, we begin with feeling compassion for ourselves, compassion for the struggles and the anxieties that we feel. And when we feel compassion for ourselves, it naturally radiates out to those around us. Think now of your world. Think of the people with whom you have deep and loving relationships. Think of your neighborhood and think of all the people you interact with, especially during normal times. Think of them now when you can't see them. Think of all the people that come into your consciousness around our world. And let your natural feelings of compassion arise. Who in your sphere of influence is in need of compassion now? Where is the spirit of compassion calling you? How can you practice compassion today? Take just a moment now to discern where your path of compassion is leading you. Think of those people for whom you feel a special compassion on this morning. And gratitude. Remember when you were growing up and your parent always asked, did you remember to say thank you, or did you remember to send a thank you card to somebody that gave you a gift? And you almost would have not rather received the gift than have to sit down and write that note because it was so hard to do. But so practicing gratitude, if we carry childhood memories like that, almost seems like an obligation. We're supposed to feel grateful. That's not true at all. Really, gratitude arises naturally when you are simply aware that everything in our life, virtually everything in our life, is a gift. And we become aware of the gifts of our lives. And as we become aware of the gifts of our lives, we become happier, more grateful. I invite you now to think of those blessings in your life right now for which you feel grateful. If you were going to start a gratitude journal today, what would be in that gratitude journal? Think about that. Realize how gratitude helps us let go of our toxic emotions. It gives us a truer sense of the interdependent nature of our lives. So write in your gratitude journal today, what would your entry be? Take just a moment now. Consider all the gifts you're enjoying. And what moves you to say thanks? And who moves you to say thanks? Let's tune into our deep and profound feelings of gratitude. Gratitude and compassion, those are our paths. Amen.
If you will indulge me, I have a little metaphorical story. It will start to make sense as it goes along. First officer's log, week 8, star date 04/30/2020. It has been 8 weeks since the ship's assignment changed from one of exploration to one of just gliding as we slowly maneuver through this seemingly endless expanse of space, cluttered with remnants of meteors. The tricky thing is, some of these seemingly innocent pieces of rock are actually bombs. Placed here so long ago by who and why, nobody seems to remember. Hit one, and it triggers a series of explosions that could cripple the ship and most likely kill the crew inside. So we have to go slowly, carefully, keeping as much distance as possible between us and the space debris, while still moving forward so that we can get back to our normal mission of exploration. The crew's morale is slowly melting. When we first came upon this, some thought we could just plow right through. We are the biggest ship in the fleet, after all. But soon it became apparent that no, the safest approach was to power down and just glide through. This allows for a flexibility and adaptation that soon became apparent was needed in order to survive. The directive: take a breath and slow the ship to glide. What was viewed as first by some as a chance for a need vacation from all the duties, the things that normally need to get done, a chance to sit back, relax, catch up on some reading. Soon is at week 8, I think, turning into a lethargy that I fear it'll be difficult to motivate them again when it comes time for our new adventure. Of course, not everyone is like that. And the engineering crew has been fabulous, ever working to make sure the ship still runs smoothly and that we have enough energy to make it through this mess. And the astrophysics team has been working with navigation team to make sure that we safely and carefully haven't missed anything while we try to get out of this as quickly and safely as possible. It feels like an endless limbo state of existence, neither moving forward or backwards, just floating. Good things are coming out of this too. I guess we get so focused on our mission, what's coming next, what needs to be done, that we forget sometimes about our humanity, our need to connect, and our need to create. I never knew all the hidden talents the crew had that are coming out during this downtime. We have quite a few artists, gardeners, and chefs in our explorers, and we are all benefiting from their generosity and expression during this time. And so we glide, knowing that each day we have done what we could to keep ourselves safe, healthy, and moving forward into this brave new world. And we also remember that we are enough. Just being ourselves is enough. And so we glide.
You know who Reverend William Ellery Copeland is? He was a Unitarian minister from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. I want to tell you a little bit about him. He came from a working class family, unlike most Unitarian clergy of that era. But they were really solid Unitarians, his family, and his parents so admired the great minister William Ellery Channing, who was often called, if you study the history of our movement, William Ellery Channing is often called the father of American Unitarianism. And they named their son after him, William Ellery Copeland. Copeland must have been a real adventurer and a seeker. He left his hometown in Massachusetts, his native soil in Massachusetts, after his ordination to start a ministry in the Midwest. He probably had to do that because his upper class, better connected colleagues had the New England pulpits covered. So if he wanted to be a Unitarian minister, he was going to have to head out west. And so he did. In his early ministry in the Midwest, he apparently caused some trouble for the railroad company with his pro-labor activism. So they ran him out of town. And then he landed in, according to historical records, he landed in Modesto, California. And things didn't go particularly well for him there either. So he headed up to the Pacific Northwest, where he did, I'm happy to say, he had two successful ministries. One of them was in Tacoma, Washington, and the other one was here in Salem, Oregon, where William Ellery Copeland served for 7 years at the beginning of the 20th century as the first Unitarian minister of record in this community. After he completed his service here, ill health forced him to retire, and he retired to a socialist commune up in the Olympic Peninsula. Really interesting guy. It was during Copeland's ministry here that he discovered this utopian novel that just had an incredibly dramatic impact upon him. Indeed, this novel, looking backward, 2000 to 1887, it was by Edward Bellamy. This was the third best-selling novel of the 19th century, after Uncle Tom's Cabin and Ben-Hur. This novel was published during a time not unlike our own in some ways. Big business was consolidating unprecedented wealth and power. Meanwhile, workers were clashing in the streets with the private armies of the industrialists. Big city bosses were inventing modern systems of graft. And the anarchists, meanwhile, they were plotting their revolutionary responses in secret places. But you know, as dire as that all sounds, back in that time, there was also a sense of great optimism and expectation that things should and could get better, much better. Since ancient times, when Plato wrote The Republic, and later when Thomas More wrote Utopia, thinkers had envisioned a better ideal society. And Bellamy's book was published at a time when Americans believed that things could and would get better. The book wasn't always also just popular in the United States, it was also very popular in China. Bellamy's book, Looking Backward, it told about a young Bostonian by the name of Julian West. He's put into this hypnotic state in the year 1887. And then 113 years later, he's awakened. And there he discovers that technological innovation and idealistic values have merged to create a utopia. Wow. A contemporary writer, William Sloat, sums up Bellamy's vision. And he notes that the universal reign, according to this book, Looking Backward, the universal reign of brotherhood and sisterhood has arrived. War has disappeared, and so have advertisements, retail stores, servants, garbage, political parties, public corruption, state governments, lawyers, armies and navies, jails, professional athletes, labor unions, banks and money. Crime and insanity and suicide are rare. Social distinctions have dissolved in a comfortable equality. The state manages all industrial activity and provides jobs for everyone. And people retire at the age of 45 and spend the rest of their lives in leisure. Harmony between the sexes has become perfect. Everyone is educated and intelligent. Public spirit has overcome selfishness. All the people share the wealth equally and want for nothing in a society that's free from conflicts that characterize all previous societies in human history. Well, you know, except for being completely wrong about everything, Bellamy really nailed it, didn't he? Today, having actually lived through the year 2000, it wasn't anything like that, wasn't it? We still had professional athletes and lawyers and all. I don't know why we want to get rid of them, but anyway, it's quite a vision. But we've lived through the year 2000. And we know of the painful, tragic history of the past century that preceded it. We had 2 world wars, untold devastation from both of them. It was the Holocaust and other Holocausts too, in Rwanda and in Cambodia. Terrible purges and gulags. And in the 20th century was when we introduced our nation, the atomic bomb is a weapon. So it's kind of hard to suppress a cynical chortle when you hear about these naive predictions about how great the world was going to be in the year 2000. But at the time, people were so enthralled by Bellamy's vision that Bellamy clubs, I think about 160 plus of them, Bellamy clubs, they sprang up all across America. And their members, they discussed and they promoted the ideas presented in this book. And indeed, our own Reverend Copeland here in Salem was the president of the local Bellamy Club. I wonder if I'd been alive at the time if I would have been tempted to join. I'm not sure, but a lot of people were. Now, here's a really, really supreme irony of this whole thing. One reason we don't live in a utopian society such as Bellamy envisioned, it's not because people neglected to try to create such a society. It's because people did try. They tried very, very hard. When you look at it closely, Bellamy's work, it's a collectivist vision. The individual has disappeared into a happily blended societal smoothie. And we have learned from the Nazis and the Bolsheviks and the theocrats and the ideologues and the authoritarians of all stripes, how the implementation of collectivist visions intended to bring about good so often leads to tragic and evil outcomes. Many who have tried to create heavens on earth with their grand secularist or religious visions and crusades have instead so often created hells. It should be noted, for example, that during Copeland's lifetime, in his era, social liberals, including the Unitarian president of Stanford University and progressive women's rights organizations of that time, they promoted a practice it was called eugenics and forced sterilization of women deemed unfit to give birth. And California's comprehensive program inspired the Nazis to adopt similar practices to eliminate the undesirables from society. As C.S. Lewis noted, history isn't just a story of bad people doing bad things. It is quite as much a story of people trying to do good things, but somehow something goes wrong. Now, fast forward to now. Even as Reverend Copeland and other idealists, they were once enthralled by utopian visions. But today, the opposite holds true, I would say. Dystopian visions of the future prevail. How many dystopian movies and books are out there is anyone's guess. Anytime there's a movie about the future, it's almost always some kind of a dystopian vision. The zeitgeist of our times, the spirit of our age, trends distinctly dystopian. It's been going on for a long time. When I was 8 years old, I was first introduced. I remember I was first introduced to dystopian thinking, and I became a dystopian thinker at the age of 8. My family was living near the border of East Germany on an army base. My dad worked for the Red Cross, and so I was sort of like an army brat for a while, living on an army base there in Germany, 1957. And in the early morning hours, before we even got out of bed, 5 a.m., 6 a.m., you could hear the tanks rumbling and the soldiers marching out in preparation for a conflict that my father told me was coming. My father said there would be a conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union that would involve the use of nuclear weapons. He said that was probably going to happen in a few years. Then, just a few years later, this message was driven home by the nuclear bomb drills we had in elementary school during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Some of you will remember that. So I actually did grow up thinking that humankind was doomed when I thought about it. Likewise, today, young people are rightfully concerned about the future impact of climate change and the impact that this will have upon them and future generations. Who can blame the young people for feeling this way, and who can blame them for blaming us? Just as my generation once blamed an older generation. And now, here we are during this period of limbo during this pandemic. And we know that when we gather again, our world is not going to be the same. Many fear what does lie in the future. What is the future, though? What is the future? The writer C.S. Lewis noted, the future is something which everyone reaches at the rate of 60 minutes an hour, whatever you do, whoever you are. Which brings me back to this present moment. And the words of the poet Mary Oliver come to mind. She writes, doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? What a line. Doesn't everything die at last too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? It's a question we all answer by our lives, by the way we live. And if my answer to this question, what will I do with my one wild and precious life, is that I'm gonna spend my precious life worrying about a possible dystopian future and neglect to appreciate this life that I have today, if that's what I do, then it's not far-fetched to say that at the end of my days, I will lament having wasted my days in fruitless despair. I say this because I've already wasted enough days of my life in fearful, anxious thought. It clouds my mental horizon, and it only brings needless suffering. Really, think about it. The unfathomable complexity of reality mocks our efforts to predict the future. Experts and scholars in many fields, they may present us with their predictions and their projections, but no one can consider the infinite variables at work, most of them unknown, that will shape our future. A certain measure of humility is in order, I would say, when we consider how wrong Bellamy and his many admirers were, and how likely it is that when we project into the future, we're probably going to be just about as wrong. And if that's not humbling enough, consider this fact. Polls show that chimpanzees outperform humans on multiple choice tests in describing the way things are actually trending in our world. That's right, the chimpanzees do better than us on multiple choice tests in describing the way things are actually trending in our world. And why do the chimpanzees beat us like this? It's because they guess at random. And humans are, according to one international health expert, on these tests, humans are systematically and mistakenly pessimistic, even on the most basic questions. Even as the zeitgeist of our times is dystopian, there are notable scholars today who note that genuine social progress has been and continues to be made in our world. Evolutionary biologist Nicholas Christakis at Yale University notes that while there are problems and challenges in the short term, the overall trend of humanity is one that is positive and improving. Did you know that? While there are problems and challenges in the short term, he says, the overall trend of humanity is one that is positive and improving. Which is to say that in the long haul, human society tends to improve. Consider, for instance, all the gains that have been made here in Salem since Copeland was the minister here. You know, Black people weren't even allowed to legally reside in our state then. Yikes. Women didn't have the vote. Factories down at the place we call Riverfront Park, now they were spewing pollution into the air. You could hardly breathe if you lived downtown. The average lifespan was significantly shorter than today, even with our broken healthcare system. So looking back at history, one lesson is clear: no one knows with certainty what tomorrow will bring. We never have known, and we never will know. And it can be a pitfall to think that you do know. As the great Italian medieval Renaissance poet Dante recognized in his poetic narrative, The Divine Comedy, which includes a harrowing tour of hell, the Inferno. And in Canto 20, if you want to look it up, of the Inferno, there we see the fate of the soothsayers. You know, the soothsayers, those were the ones who predicted the future, the fortune tellers. Those are the ones who made their living by predicting the future. That's how they chose to spend their precious lives on earth. And Dante symbolically depicts them with their heads turned on backwards. That's quite an image, a human being with your head turned on backwards. And why? You may wonder, I mean, come on, telling the fortune, is that such a, telling the future, is that such a bad thing? Why have these people landed up in hell? What was their sin? Their sin is that they convinced people that the future was set, turning people into fatalists who came to believe that their individual lives, with all the possible choices they might make, made no difference in the outcome. Those who believed the fortune tellers were thus robbed of opportunities to help create and shape the future. So I don't want to end up like that with my head on backwards. I'm just kidding about that. But I don't pretend to know what the future will bring. But I do know this. I have choices to make in shaping it for the better. And I have learned that when I follow St. Augustine's advice, it generally goes well. And St. Augustine advised, are you ready? This is good advice. Love and do what you will. Love and do what you will. Will you join me now for just a brief moment of meditation, reflection, prayer? Just pause for a moment. A lot of words have been stirred up into the atmosphere. And yet, listen to your own heart now. What message is your soul sending you? Let us pause now for just a brief period of quiet reflection. And I will ring the bell at the end. Let's just pause for a moment.
Generosity is giving more than you can. And pride is taking less than you need. Khalil Gibran. In recent weeks, we have had many opportunities to be both generous to others and hopefully not been too proud to accept the help when we need it. We support UUCS through our pledges, time, and connections with one another. We support the Salem community through donations to the Marion Polk Food Share, and this month, donations to Salem Harvest, which also provides food to those underserved. Please send your checks to UUCS or visit their website to donate. Thank you for maintaining the community of UUCS and for maintaining the larger community of Salem. And now Rick will join us and he will gather the social justice lantern. Change must come, and resisting necessary changes is detrimental. But we need to remember that changes can be powerful, even when they are subtle. When we can gently hold things steady, the changes come from within. That's where the real growth happens. Reverend Alex Klingenberg. We take the light from our chalice, lighting a social justice candle as a symbolic reminder of the light and justice we carry out into the world. We now extinguish our own chalice, hoping to carry it through the week until we meet again.
Our closing hymn today is Just as Long as I Have Breath. It's number 6 in the gray hymnal.
Please join me as we say our closing words together. We normally say join hands. So why don't you join hands with somebody? Just imagine somebody on your left side and your right side and hold hands. Just have that sense of connection with this community as we say our closing words together. May faith in the spirit of life, hope for the community of earth, and love for the sacred in one another be ours now and in all the days to come.